animals. Welcome to another week of Story Shamans. This week, we're talking about Cubby number 6, conflict. What is it? Conflict is tension. Tension between what you want and what is. When your will or desire is impeded by an outside force. In a story, conflict is usually between characters. But as we know, there are a few more types of conflict. Along with man versus man, you've also got man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus society. The simplest way to identify conflict in your story is to ask yourself, self, who fights what over what? If it's your main character versus another person, what are they fighting over? Is it that they both have the same goal and they're in direct competition? Two men fighting over a job. Or is it that they have different goals and they're in direct opposition? Like a cop chasing a criminal. Any conflict will fall under one of these four categories. Man versus man, man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus society. Who fights what over what? Man fights man for a job. Man fights self for redemption. Man fights nature for survival. Man fights society for justice. Just like a desire line, a conflict line is broken down into smaller sub-conflicts. These sub-conflicts can be related, or they can be unrelated. There'll be one overarching conflict, which will be your main focus. Then smaller conflicts that directly or indirectly relate to the overall conflict. When crafting conflict in your story, it's best to hit on all four categories of conflict. Have an element in your story that represents man, self, nature, and society. Whichever is your main conflict, the other three can act as sub-conflicts. Four different sources of conflict that impede a character's goals. But we can take it a step further and put these conflicts in direct opposition with each other. These sub-conflicts are not just at war with your main character, but also with each other. So while your main character is fighting another person, himself, nature, and society, we've also got the villain fighting your main character, fighting himself, fighting nature, and fighting society. Then we've also got nature fighting with society, nature fighting itself, and society fighting itself. That's a lot of conflict, and this won't always be possible. Most of the time, it'll just be the main character versus another person, himself, nature, and society. But the more conflict, the better. If you pit the elements against each other, then it's an all-out brawl. And that makes for one hell of a story. Next week, we're moving on to Cubby number 7. Revelation.